Atheists can and do perform rituals. It doesn't have to be religious. It can be, once a year, you go to your mother's favorite spot on the lake and think about her. Is a death ritual. That is a death ritual.
Hello, and welcome to Death is for the Dying, a special season of the Life is for the Living podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Richmond. Something that I have struggled with throughout my life is how to honor those in my life that have died, how to acknowledge the sacredness of their death, and how to keep their memory alive. This is particularly hard if you're not part of an organized religion where there are prescribed rituals and everybody knows what to do. But just because you don't subscribe to a given religion doesn't mean that rituals don't have a place in your experience of death. It just means that you have to figure out which rituals are meaningful and helpful to you. Which leads me to my next guest, Rebecca Lynn-Scott. She does subscribe to a particular religion, Hellenic polytheism, and worships the Greek gods. But given the limited number of current practitioners and the time since it was a widely practiced religion, the rituals are either unknown or not feasible in the modern world. So Rebecca was given a task: come up with rituals for death that reflect her beliefs but are adapted for modern time. And this research gave her a unique perspective on rituals and their significance in facing death.
So I am a Hellenic polytheist, which means that I worship the gods of ancient Greece. I'm a pagan, and I was part of an ecstatic Orphic Bacchic group, which is specifically dedicated to Dionysus and follows specific ancient Greek traditions as the little that's come down to us. And it was very death and resurrection focused. Dionysus is a dying and resurrecting god. And I said to the leader of my group, wow, with all this focus on death, why don't we have any funeral rituals? That's weird. And he's like, you're right, that is weird. Thanks for volunteering. And I spent the next 3 years, even after that group imploded, I spent the next 3 years studying every aspect of death I could think of so that I could write funeral rituals. That was in, I want to say 2015. It might have been 2016. And one of the very first things that I did was join Death Cafe, which is a conversation group about death, dying, and life. I am now enough of a regular that I've missed like half a dozen times in all those years. And I help run the local one, which is now online. We are talking about now in 2024, finally going back to in-person, but we will maintain the online presence and online meetings.
I have some questions about a little bit off topic with the death thing, but what drew you to being a Hellenistic pagan? I haven't met someone. I've met plenty of pagans, lots of Wiccans and varieties of witchcraft, but Hellenistic pagan is not super common.
No, I am effectively a corner case of a corner case of a corner case. Hellenic, not Hellenistic. There actually is a distinction.
Okay. My apologies.
It's all right. So I worship the ancient Greek gods with the understanding that they are each distinct and unique beings and not part of a greater god, which is a Wiccan tenet. That all goddesses are one goddess and all gods are one god. And I don't believe that. I practice what is effectively a form of home worship centered on the hearth and my home and space within my home that is a temple, which was very common And then there were big public festivals. And I only do a few festivals, and I have to do them by myself or with one or two other people, and it's not the same. But it is very rewarding for me. My patrons are Dionysus and Hecate, and I worship a number of other gods as it becomes appropriate, essentially. Like, effectively, there is one day a month where I make an offering to Zeus, and there is one day a month when I make an offering to Hermes. My first step was to try and find community, which is always what I lean towards, is to find other people who do what I'm trying to do. So I found the Death Cafe, and I found pagan death workers. I found people who practice ancestor worship, which I also do. And I started making connections. And I started making connections with thanatologists, who are people who study the sociology of death. And then I just ordered a huge stack of books and dove in. There are some fascinating books out there. I got really into studying home funerals. I got really into studying the Greek and also Roman funeral rituals. I got into studying, I'm going to say this word, and everybody's going to misunderstand me. I got into necromancy. Necromancy means divination by means of the dead. It means asking the dead for advice.
Okay.
That is the original. Mentea is divination in Greek.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm going to say the word and everybody's going to misunderstand me.
Yes.
And I got into reading a lot about the laws around death. I did read some archaeology stuff, but mostly focused on the specific cultures in which I have an interest religiously.
What sort of is the core, I guess, psychological need for humans to have rituals?
All right, so I'm going to define ritual a little differently than most people. Most people think of ritual as religious, but a ritual is effectively, it's a little bit broader than this, but I would define ritual as any actions we take to mark an event, either internal or external. The core need is to mark and come to understand death in our own ways. And I think that without ritual, most people cannot understand death in a healthy way. I won't say everybody. Never let it be said that I said everybody.
Yeah.
But I think most people need ritual to understand.
I actually have come to very similar conclusion that so I'm much more of sort of a natural spiritualism agnostic, I guess.
Sure.
Even though I don't necessarily believe wholeheartedly in whatever it is, whatever it is that I may or may not believe in. I find ritual is a very helpful psychological tool.
Absolutely. Ritual in general helps us to understand what we're going through, helps us to figure out our relationship to it. And so I am big on ritualizing things. It is part of how I interact with the world. And even before I undertook all this death ritual work, I ritualized a lot of my life. And I have my little daily rituals, and I have my monthly rituals, and I have my yearly ritual. Every year on the anniversary of the Challenger, I raise a glass of whiskey in their names. Ritual is also, before I leave the house, I sit down on the second stair from the bottom of the stairs before I go out the door and stop and think, this is my house. And then I go.
And does that stopping and saying, this is my house, I guess sort of like what's the motivation for that?
It's like, this is my safe space that I can come back to. Yes, I'm going out into the world, and the world can be big and scary and exhausting and painful. I am disabled. Going out is often a really big deal for me. And then I stop on the way back in as well. And I go, this is my house. This is where I live. This is my safe space. And that helps me to take up the outside world and to put it off again.
That makes a lot of sense. I think ritual, for me, it does a couple of things, but one is it puts that honor, it acknowledges that something has happened, but it is also a way to manage my anxiety.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Which is not not something that I think people talk about enough, but I think it's definitely a real thing.
I also have anxiety. Ritual is definitely soothing to that. It is, that's one of the reasons ritual is useful around death.
Yeah.
Is to manage our anxiety about death.
What is your relationship with death right now, having gone through all of this?
I do not especially fear death. All of us have anxiety about death. But I'm not somebody who's scared to die. I have very firm ideas about what will happen to me after death, and that I feel confident in. I do not know what happens to other people, but I firmly believe, because I believe that I speak to the dead. I firmly believe that that there is continuation of life after death, and that we don't. I hate the word gone. Let me put it that way. For somebody who's died, they're not gone. If you know what you're doing, it's like they're in the next room, and you can go to the door and have a conversation with them. So I don't quite look forward to my death, but I look forward to my afterlife, and I hope that I can have a good death.
How would you define a good death?
A good death for me is a death that I can see coming enough to make a ritual of it, have the time and space to say my prayers and take my ritual bath, and be ready, but preferably not one long and drawn out. But mostly a good death is a death where I get to connect with people one last time.
Do you mind me asking what ritual you would want performed after you die?
Oh my goodness. I have a whole funeral plan.
Okay.
So when I started researching funeral ritual, I broke it down into stages, and I have a plan that acknowledges each little bit. So I want to be washed, or at least spritzed down with our equivalent of holy water. And I want to be wrapped in a shroud, which hopefully I will weave myself. And I want a funeral feast, and I want a procession to and from the graveyard, or not the graveyard, because I'm not going to be buried. I'm going to be composted. But I want a procession to and from, and I want the funeral feast after. And then there are rituals that are specific to my tradition. That there is a prayer that I want said for me for 7 days after I die, candles lit and a prayer. And I have one person who has agreed to do this for me. And she may not get it done every night, and that's okay. But any day that she does that can help me on my journey. It's called the rite of smoothing the path.
I was just going to say that's in broad strokes, that's going to be much more of a complex ritual compared to the traditional American burial.
Oh, absolutely. And it is my goal to have specific friends that I can count on to make sure that the bits happen. But not everybody needs to be involved in all the bits.
Right.
My mourners can show up at whatever memorial and which I really plan to be the funeral feast. Show up for dinner, talk about me, reminisce, set a plate at the table for me, as because the deceased was considered to be the host of the meal. So set a place for me, everybody eats, everybody talks, and then everybody can leave. And that's okay. I want there to be some acknowledgement of my religion.
When somebody is facing death or has a family member who is facing death, what would you recommend that they do to prepare for that?
There is something called pre-mourning, which is before the event happens, you think about how you will feel and you let yourself live those feelings. And that is, to me, good preparation. You can process a little ahead of time. You're still going to get hit with everything, but at least you can have a path for yourself. I recommend spending as much time with your loved ones as possible, whether that's you as a dying person spending time with your loved ones, or you as the loved one of someone who is dying spending time with that person. But also, if someone you love is dying, spend time with the other people you love too, because you desperately need to have a life outside of your loved one dying. Those to me are the most important things you can do.
Amen to that.
If you're trying to plan for your own death, think about what kind of ceremony you want, or if you don't want any ceremony. My father wants the immediate family to gather and spread his ashes in the river outside his house. Okay, that's all he wants. Then he can have that. But also think about what your loved ones want, as I said, because that's not going to be enough for me when he dies. I am going to need rituals. And I have my rituals for when somebody dies that I do. And maybe your friends want something to remember you by. Maybe they should hold a wake. My dad goes to the pub every day, and his friends will probably hold a wake whether he wants it or not.
Yeah, there's a real level in which funerals are for the living.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've spent years now studying death.
Mm-hmm.
What lessons for living have you learned from that?
Grab hold and live as hard as you can.
So, just out of curiosity, why composting rather than cremation, traditional burial, natural burial, aquamation?
Natural burial is my second choice. I like composting better because at least maybe I can have the compost donated someplace that I like. We will see what happens with that legally. It's up in the air right now. I don't like modern embalming. It's bad for the environment. As a pagan, I don't want my remains to be taken out of the cycle of life. I want my body to be part of nature forever. All the parts of me to keep being used to nourish the earth. Cremation actually is not as green as people think it is. It uses up a lot of natural gas to light the oven. And it's not horrible. And there are places in town that do it more efficiently, I guess, than other places. But I don't like that doesn't recycle me effectively. Aquamation is like a distant third for me. Do you know what aquamation is?
Yeah. I tried to vote for my mom to get, well, my mom's still alive, but I was like, we could do aquamation. And I was shot down hard.
My big complaint about aquamation is that they don't let you dump the nutrient rich solution someplace growing. It has to be disposed of in specific ways. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But there's no explaining that to some people.
So you talked about, washing the dead body.
Hmm.
I'm just kind of curious, like, is there some part of death care, I guess, or even caring for the dying that you wouldn't want to do? It's like you're like, I couldn't do that.
The only thing that I can think of is that I'm not sure that I could actually assist with medical aid in dying. I am not sure that I could do that. I am not sure that I couldn't do that, but I'm not sure that I could. I could be there for it. I'm not certain that I could be the one to hand over the potion.
What for you does washing the body symbolize?
Hellenic polytheism is very concerned with spiritual cleanliness, with being cleansed. And it is specifically important in my tradition, in Orphism, for other reasons. But washing my body makes me ready to go to the gods. And there are ritual baths for me to do ahead of time, and then the washing of the body afterwards. And all of that is important to me. I wouldn't necessarily require somebody who loves me to wash my body because that is a big ask in our society. But if somebody who loves me could drop off a spray bottle of holy water, it's called Kernips, and drop it off and say, just spritz her down with this. And that's enough for me. Like I had, you got to make compromises. You got to figure out what's enough.
Yeah.
So that's my enough.
What is one way or multiple ways that we can make people more comfortable in talking about death?
There are all kinds of ways to do this. And one of the first ones is to be the one who starts the conversation. To go, I would like to talk about this. Would that be okay with you? There are games, like card games, that are used to start conversations about death. You can look them up. I think one of them is called the conversation game. And that's kind of an icebreaker thing. You can show others that you are comfortable with death to help them be more comfortable. We can each educate ourselves about death so that it is less frightening, so that we can talk about it more easily. And we can, trying to think how to put this, we can come to our own understanding and peace with death. And showing that we have that to others will make it easier for them.
Lastly, Rebecca told us about ritualistic ways to handle not just death, but grief.
I teach wailing as a way of mourning.
I kind of know what you're talking about, but I think it would be good to get a little bit more explanation.
Yeah. So the purposes of my class is I define wailing as opening your mouth and letting grief come out. Now, wailing is an ancient tradition and it's done differently in different cultures. It is found all over the world, though not in every culture. Sometimes it is crying and screaming. Sometimes it is wordless but musical. Sometimes it is music. It is a specific style of singing. I teach wordless but musical wailing. It sounds something like, except that it rises and falls and goes through different vowel sounds. And when you get people together doing it, it passes, because there is no one note to hit, it passes through harmony and dissonance and back and forth. And it's quite powerful done correctly. And I encourage people to try this, to just open your mouth and make the noise that will let your grief out. Now, maybe that means singing your loved one's favorite song and singing along to the radio, and that's fine. And maybe it means screaming and crying, and that's fine. Whatever it is that you need to do to let it out, that's wailing. And and you can do it as loudly or as quietly as you need. You do not need to make a lot of noise. I have wailed very, very quietly in a bathroom at work because I desperately needed to let my grief out in that moment.
Join us next time when we'll be talking cemeteries and race with our guest, Jennifer. Until that time, take care. And you can join the conversation by reaching out to @lifeisfortheL on Twitter and Instagram, or email us at lifeisforthelivingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can check out these episodes and the epitaphs on the Life is for the Living YouTube channel.